I really like to talk about the drill bits because there's a few little tips that I can tell you to set your mind at rest. And one of them is when you have set your drill bit, you've laid it on here or you've done whatever, and you're still feeling a little bit apprehensive. One way you can check is by having your block will already be set. Pop it down any of the holes, and if the collar sits here on the top and it doesn't touch the base, it's off this plastic base by about 2-3 mil. If it clears the base, you're good to go. If you find that you pop it in, and not only does your drill bit sit right against the base, but this is up to about here, you're in trouble because it's not at the right setting. So it's a really nice way to just pop it in, go, yep, collar sits on there, this is not touching, I'm good to go. On some of the higher settings, it will be much higher off the block. As long as it's not touching the block, we're good to go. So that's the first thing I wanted to tell you. The second thing about the drill bits, I've got lots of them. They happen to stay sharp for a really long time unless you're using lots of hardwoods. The ends of them differ. This seems to be the newer one that everyone gets these days. However, you might have the rounded ones. The rounded ones can wear, and you might find that your collar won't go up and over it anymore. You can give that a sand with some sandpaper for metal, but on the whole, it means it's wearing. It's just where the jaws of the chuck are gripping really tight. This one's a little bit trickier to put in the chuck. I find that. It's got flat surfaces, and you've got jaws in there. You've got 3 jaws. Jaws, not drawers, jaws. And if I press the back button and hold the collar here, you can see that the jaws go right back. And if I push the forward button and hold the collar, then they'll come forward. And this is what grips your drill bit. Open the chuck, and you want to make sure that the jaws of the chuck rest flat on these flat facets. So bring this open, thumb, hold the collar, turn, open that up, sit your piece in there and hold the collar while you do it up, and then anti-clockwise, or clockwise rather, depending on which way you're looking at it, and do it up. And just have a go with it and make sure that it's going straight and forward, not in reverse. When all your pieces are cut, you're now going to set the rail against your leg. And you've got some choices here to alter the personality of your piece of furniture, depending on where you place the rail. So you can alter the style of it by having the rail flush with the front. Or you can bring it back just a few mil. You can see that. And that will give a more contemporary look. And then further back will be a bit more colonial. And then you can go further back than that, and it might look a bit weird. When you're learning, I highly recommend that you have a lip, even if it's a tiny lip of just a few mil, because when you are clamping it all together, there can be some slippage, meaning your rail, even with the pockets in it, as that screw reaches this virgin side of the wood, it can shift. And I will show you clamping in the next section, but even then with the clamps on, it can still be disappointing to find that your screw has come through the surface of the front of your leg. And this can happen in a box or any situation. So I just recommend that you learn with that little lip, and then as you get more confident, figure out how to keep it really flush so that that doesn't come through. You can pull the screw back a little bit, but you've got a little hole in the top of your wood now. Sometimes you need the wood to be flush. You can't bring it back this way or that way because it's the same thickness. So in that case, a clamp that looks like this is really useful. If I was to clamp this to here and this to here, that would be useful to keep this joint really flat. However, as the screw hits the long grain here, it will still want to shift, and you can get a little tipping of the joint. This clamp, it has its limitations obviously, and they are expensive, although you can get generic ones. Has two little flat surfaces, and I'm just going to show you how you pop it on here, and you've got one clamping it on this surface and the other clamping on it, so it keeps it really flush. But then you've got to figure out how to get your drill bit, your drill and driver down that way, and that's not impossible, but you just need to be a bit of a genius. So clamping up again is tricky, but it's definitely worthwhile getting it just right. You'll get a really good result. So that's just another way to join wood, that you need it to be flush. I will show you how to join your wood together so that it is strong, and that you're making sure you're putting your pockets in the right piece. So in order to explain it, the easiest way is to have a little lesson about the actual wood structure. If you imagine the inside of a piece of wood has a whole lot of cells in it, and they look like a bunch of straws. This is the long grain of the wood, and all the straws lay down. The end of the wood, if you had a microscope, I'll just get a piece without lots of holes in it. The end of the wood is like the ends of the straws. It's got a whole lot of holes in it. So end grain and long grain are quite different in structure. So what we want to do is join into the long grain, because it's much stronger to join into the long grain than it is to join into the end grain. So that means that when I'm putting these two pieces together, my leg and my rail, I'm going to put the pockets in the rail, and it's going to go into the long grain like that, and that will be really strong. I can also use this jig to join long grain to long grain this way. So if I wanted to make a tabletop and I've only got narrow pieces and they're the same thickness, I can put pockets in them from one piece to another, which is pretty exciting. So I can go from there into that one, there into that one, and so on. If I used glue as well and waited for the glue to dry, I could then remove the screws and it would be just as strong, because glue is incredibly strong. We want to be able to put the pockets in the right piece. So if you can just remember that you always want to go into the long grain, and that'll keep you safe. So that means you're thinking probably, oh, that means I can't join end grain to end grain. And that certainly doesn't work in most situations, because you're going from the ends into the ends. When you're joining three pieces of wood together, a leg, say, and two rails, just be mindful where you put your screws. In this particular case, I've got two over to the side here, so that these ones can come in here into this piece of wood. So that's something to think about, to strategically place your screws. That's really important. People say to me, Pat, I don't like those great big holes. They don't look very nice. So I show them this. It's got, the pockets have been covered over, and you can buy the plugs exactly the right color for your wood, and you can get them from Kreg, or you can make your own. They're a little bit tricky to make your own unless you've got a special jig, which I'll show you in a minute. Once your piece is together, put some PVA in the hole and PVA on the plug and push it down with the spiky bit out. Tip it up, I find the easiest way, and give it a little wobble in there, because they're quite thick and sometimes they don't sit the way you want, and you know that the glue is swollen the wood a little bit, so you've got that against you as well. And you want to eliminate that little gap there, and you can get there we go. Wiggle it in. It's going to be a little bit harder because the glue will swell the wood, and tap it down with a hammer or a piece of wood and let it dry, and then sand it back when it's dry, and it will look like that. So it's a lovely way to actually make a feature on your wood, or just to hide, but it's not necessary. And just remember, it means that if you glue or you plug, you won't be able to take your piece apart. And I love taking my pieces apart when I make recycled furniture or recycle things for the workshop. It may not have the same use for always, so I get a lot of comfort in knowing that I can pull that piece apart and chop up the wood and use it for something else. So you can't do it too many times, or your joints can become a little bit loose, but I do. I got really excited when Kreg made a product that actually makes the little plugs. That meant that I could match exactly the right color to my project. And when I did that on some Western red cedar windows lately, I was very grateful, because I'd actually made a little boo-boo on them and was able to mend it and use the plugs with this, exactly the same color, and you could not see it. It was awesome. But it is pricey. So unless you're doing lots and lots and you're going to go for it and sell your furniture and stuff like that, I wouldn't recommend it. But I just had to have one. And what's great about them, or this particular one, is that it will fit in the block of your Kreg jig. So this pulls out and this pulls in, and you use your plug cutter to grab the plugs. And if you can't justify it, then you could ask for a birthday present. That's really cool. I will talk to you now about clamps and joining the timber together. Once you've cut all your pieces, you've got your pocket holes in them, and you're ready to, you may have sanded it. I like to sand everything before I assemble. You will like to keep track of the pieces that you're putting together. I use a bit of bright colored chalk, so I know which is the face I want to face out, and that means nice bright symbols. And I want to know the edge as well, and I just make some marks on the wood. They can be anything you like. So I know that they are the face, that's the face I want to see. So that means I need to turn this piece over, and that'll be obvious because you've got your pockets in them. And I want to turn this piece over to here, and this piece over to here. So think about where everything's going to land and everything's going to be, so that you can keep track of the legs in the right orientation. Now, we talked earlier about having a little lip on the front when you're learning, so that it doesn't go out of alignment or your screw doesn't come through. So what I recommend is just some thin pieces of ply. This is just 3.8 or 4 millimeters, and pop it under there. I want to clamp the leg, and I want to clamp the rail, but you can see that my table leg is in the way. So when I clamp, I can clamp the leg okay, but I can't get this in. There are a couple of things that Kreg sell at great expense. These are about $60 or more. And this little bit, I call it the pokey thing. It's really not, I don't know what's it called. Call it the pokey thing. Go and get the pokey thing. And you poke that in one of the holes. Be gentle here because this part is vulnerable and can easily tear or split. Place that little part against there and then clamp this up. Now mine's not clamping because I need to adjust this. So while this is open, I turn it clockwise in to make it tighter. And then I try again. Now that's too tight. So I need to loosen this again, go 1 or 2 turns and try again. There are automatic ones these days and they're much easier. But when you've got them set, they're good to go. Remember, we want flush here and we've got our little bit of ply underneath. See, that took me 3 times to get that right, but that should be set for the other ones as well. And now that means that all I have to do is clamp all of it together. So when I'm ready to drill, I can put my screw in the other 3 holes, and I'm good to go. Once that's joined together, I don't need this anymore because that screw will have held it. So I can get that out of the way and continue with the others. It might only be 2 or 3. Another thing that can happen when you have a small project is that when you're ready to screw this one, you push that out of the way and you can screw in there and in there. But then when you're ready to do this one, your whole drill and your driver is too long and it may be at the wrong angle to try and get it in. You can get shorter ones of these, so that would work in this case. But sometimes your project is really tiny. It might be a little box. And in which case, I've got this really nifty little tool. I don't know where I got it, but it will drive in screws around corners because this is all bendy. So if you've got really tricky places to get into, it may get into a tight spot. So when you're designing your piece, just bear that in mind. How will you be able to get your screws in? So I've got a short square bit and I've got, there's a little ratchet on here, and push the ratchet up. And I can, as long as that's clamped really firmly, I can screw that in tight, which is really, really great. There's always one way to skin a cat. More than one way to skin a cat. There's always more than that. We can cut all of that, isn't that good? You can't have enough clamps. You hear people say that. I love the Irwin clamps. This is a 600 long ones, but you can get shorter ones. Don't buy really cheap clamps, they just don't last. So with a small project like this, if you've only got a couple of clamps, you might be able to clamp from leg to leg to support it while you're driving your screws. And that's another way. There is lots of ways to clamp your project together, but try it out first before you get ready to screw it or glue it or put glue on it. Do a dry run. Put it all together as much as you can. Think about whether you'll put this end together and then you'll put the opposite end of that together, and then you'll join the other 2 rails to it. Think about whether you've got a lower rail and that you would have to put that on at the same time. So there's all these decisions and all thinking around it so that you'll have the best success so that it's not frustrating. Some of the Kreg videos are fantastic. You can watch somebody build a whole cabinet with a drawer in it, all with this Kreg jig. But boy, they make it look easy. And what they make look easy is the clamping up, the assembly. and it's not easy. So that's probably the hardest part of this whole system, is the actual clamping of it, which is really funny. But you'll have a lot of fun with it. I do. Yeah.